Hi guys, my name's Isabel Fink, and the article I looked at was the impact of adverse childhood experiences and the outcomes of violent behaviors on early adulthood. To now get into the background, what is early life adversity? Early life adversity can be harmful or unstable experiences in childhood, can include but are not limited to abuse, violence, parental addiction, mental illness, financial stress, etc. It also can affect our brain development, stress response, emotional regulation, and social learning. So, why does ELA matters? It matters because of the hostile attribution bias, which can interrupt neutral cues and we can perceive them as threatening. It also can give us cognitive vulnerabilities such as low executive functioning or attention problems. It also includes childhood maltreatment, which can increase aggression, which I'm going to talk about more later, and also can induct different issues. There's also an environmental risk for parental psychopathology and definitely unstable caregiving. So, for my article Connection, it looked at 5 adversity trajectories, which followed kids on different paths of adversity from birth to age 11 and a half from low to high adversities. Higher rising adversity equaled more violence, more fighting, and weapon carrying from ages 13 to 20. It also looked at the dose response as adversity increases, aggression increases consistently. Another fact that it looked at was persistent versus adolescence limited, which is high adversity predicts violence that continues into adulthood and not just typical teen behavior. So now looking at the participants of the sample from this study, it was conducted with 9,665 participants, which were followed from birth to age 20. The demographics were 96% white, 4% non-white, 50% male, 50% female, but males showed significantly more violent behavior, and 24.8% of those mothers who gave birth to the adolescents experienced childhood maltreatment, as well as 76% of those parents had less than a university degree, and some lived in neighborhoods with high perceived violence. To now get into the methods and measures, when looking at the measures, the data was drawn from the Avon longitudinal study of parents and children, which is a longitudinal study in the UK. The researchers assessed adversity at 8 childhood time points from birth to age 11.5. It also measured violence outcomes at 5 different times in their period of lives, and it used the LCGM, which is the latent class growth modeling scale, and it looked at 11 years of adversity data and found hidden groups of kids who experience adversity in similar ways. It also looked at the logistics regression to test how childhood adversity predicts later violence. For the measures, it had 10 indicators of adversity, which included violence, abuse, parental mental health, substance use, etc. And it really just looked at the violence for physical fighting and weapon carrying, and they also tested for these controls listed below. Now, for the objective and the hypotheses that I came up with is the objective tested whether adversity predicts aggression in adolescence and early adulthood, and these hypotheses looked at children who experience higher or increasing adversity will show higher rates of fighting and weapon carrying during adolescence. And for the second, it looked at children in the increasing and stable high adversity groups, which is the latent class growth modeling, and will show persistent violence in early adulthood compared to adolescents, limited violence in lower adversity groups. So now looking at the table I chose, it shows bivariate associations between adversity trajectory groups, correlations, or covariates, violent behaviors, which is the physical fighting and weapon carrying. So I mostly looked at the percentages, and it just kind of let me compare violence rates across adversity levels. And I mostly looked at the trajectory group, which is fighting, weapon carrying, and the percentages were based on the latent class growth modeling, which were stable low to stable high. And then now for the results for hypothesis one is that children who experience higher increasing adversity will show higher rates of fighting and weapon carrying, and that fighting increases from stable low to stable high. Weapon carrying also increases with the highest in the decreasing group and elevated levels in the increasing and stable high. All adversity groups were definitely significant, and the low adversity continuously shows the lowest rates of aggression. So the conclusion for this hypothesis is that there is a clear dose response pattern as adversity increases, violent behavior also increases. For the results from hypothesis 2, I found that from the paper, increasing and stable high adversity groups will show persistent violence, and that the table shows the overall percentage of violent behavior, not persistence directly. But the high rates across the entire age range for increasing and stable high groups suggest that the violence isn't limited to one period, and the behavior is not just adolescence limited, and it continues on to adulthood. And the conclusion that I found is that the increasing and stable high adversity groups showed high levels of violence across the full adolescence to adulthood period, supporting the idea of persistent violence. Here are the two questions that I came up with based on the article and from class, and you can read over those and drop your responses below. Thank you so much for listening.